I believe this is the beginning of the end.
I do too.
It's really the beginning of the end.
The beginning of the end.
For Canadians, the past 2 years have been like eavesdropping as the neighbor's marriage falls apart.
Maybe feeling the walls closing in on him.
All the walls closing in on him.
The walls closing in on him.
Hearing the raised voices next door.
We begin tonight with the bombshell. Donald Trump is in a lot of trouble.
Trump is in trouble.
The president will resign.
And the denials that anyone else is involved.
I don't know Putin. I never met Putin.
I have no dealings with Russia.
And inevitably, there's the feeling that our friends south of the border may be destined for a very nasty divorce from their president.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States, Donald John Trump.
It may seem longer, but it all started just 2 years ago, January 20th, 2017. Inauguration Day in Washington. The beginning of what's already become one of the most chaotic presidencies in American history.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
And Donald Trump's inaugural address set the tone for what was to follow.
Rusted out factories scattered like tombstones across the landscape of our nation.
A bleak vision of an America victimized by crime, drugs, gangs, and greedy allies.
This American carnage stops right here and stops right now. Thank you. God bless you.
When the speech was over, former President George W. Bush was heard to say, "That was some weird shit." Donald Trump's presidency was barely half an hour old, and already some were wondering how long it would last. But Trump has hardly changed his ways to look more presidential. Indeed, for 2 years, things just got weirder.
I can be more presidential than any president in history, except for possibly Abe Lincoln with a big hat. I don't know if I can.
At his campaign-style rallies, the president still unleashes the version of reality that his base clearly wants to see. During the campaign, his rhetoric invited violence.
All right, get him out! Get him out!
Which he frequently got.
I'd like to punch him in the face, I'll tell you.
And in the White House, he's continued the attacks.
That's enough. Put down the mic. You are the enemy of the people. Go ahead.
Casting the media as the tool of the elites.
They are the fake, disgusting news.
Whom he blames for holding down his followers.
Great to have you back on the John Fredericks Radio Network, trucking the truth across America. I am your Godzilla of the Truth, coming to you live today from your nation's capital. Right.
Conservative radio host John Fredericks is one of Trump's first and staunchest supporters.
Now, the Canadian Broadcasting Company is here, so the Canadians are coming to town. So they're in here actually filming my show right now. They look like very nice people. Thanks for being here. Hello, Canada.
Fredericks says he's known from day one that Trump's enemies, especially congressional Democrats, would try to remove him from office.
Look, they're going to have to start impeachment hearings. It doesn't matter if there's no charges or what the charges are. It doesn't matter. They're going to attempt to impeach the president in the House for putting grape jelly on a peanut butter sandwich. I mean,
according to Fredericks, Trump's true believers are convinced the president has freed them after years of elite government, which they say was an economic disaster for working people.
Jobs getting shipped overseas, manufacturing plants getting closed, wages going down. Nobody has cared about the U.S. worker, the manufacturing worker, the blue-collar worker.
Let me ask you about your perception of Trump, then. I lived in New York for a decade. Donald Trump was everywhere. He was Mr. New York. He was not the champion of the little guy or the blue-collar worker. Why do you see him as this champion of that class?
It's his policies, Bob. He had no champion until Trump came along with policies to protect jobs and raise wages.
You are the Godzilla of truth.
Yes, thank you.
No gibberish, no nonsense,
yes.
Just common sense.
You got it.
How then, if truth is at the heart of what you do you handle all the untruths that have been coming out of the president's mouth since he was inaugurated?
What has he lied about?
Well,
Bob?
several thousand times, according to the Washington Post and PolitiFact and others who have been checking him.
The fact is, this president is the first president in history that is actually trying to do exactly what he said he would do. And so that is why people in this town are going crazy over it, because he's going to hold every politician to a brand new standard.
But with the Democrats controlling the House, John Fredericks knows they're now in position to hold Donald Trump himself to a whole new standard.
The subpoena cannons are coming out, and they're fully loaded. And so for the next 18 months, what you're going to get is subpoena after subpoena after subpoena after subpoena.
Congresswoman Jackie Speer will be one of those wielding the subpoenas. The Democrat from California has been in Congress for a decade, a member of the House Intelligence Committee, investigating Trump for possible election and financial misdeeds, especially with Russia.
How will the shift of power on the committee change your job?
Well, we'll be doing our job for the first time in 2 years. The committee was charged with the responsibility of investigating Russia's interference in our election, what our intelligence community needs to do to be better prepared, and to look further into whether or not there was a connection between Russia and the Trump campaign in trying to fix the election.
Indeed, there are now 17 investigations into Donald Trump, his campaign, his inauguration, his corporation, his foundation, and more. The allegations against Trump personally include obstruction of justice, undermining democracy, breaking campaign finance laws, and of course, collusion with Russia.
I have no relationship with Putin.
Never spoken to him. I don't know anything about him other than he will respect me.
Over and over, Trump denies any Russian connection.
I have no deals.
However, so far more than 30 individuals, including 26 Russians, have been charged by Special Counsel Mueller in his continuing investigation of Russian interference in the presidential election and related cases. Among them, former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, campaign aide Rick Gates, Trump's former personal lawyer Michael Cohen, former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, campaign aide George Papadopoulos. Also indicted 12 Russian intelligence operatives and 13 Russian nationals.
I now call the House to order.
In Washington today, there's blood in the water, and Donald Trump's opponents are baring their teeth. The halls of Congress ringing with the chant that Trump has used for hecklers at his rallies. Get him out. With enthusiasm last heard in the Capitol 4 decades ago.
I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
It was the summer of 1974 when Richard Nixon addressed Americans to announce his resignation, the first and so far only American president to quit.
Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour.
I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned from Watergate, a lot of similarities.
And Jill Wine-Banks should know.
Describe when and where this is, Jill.
It appears to be just days before we got the tape of the smoking gun that forced Richard Nixon to resign.
That's a moment in history.
It's quite amazing.
As now, uncharted territory.
Exactly.
She was the only female prosecutor assigned to investigate the break-in at Democratic headquarters at the Watergate Hotel in Washington, and Republican President Richard Nixon's role in it. She sees a parallel between that and the case being built against Donald Trump now.
Is the relationship between Trump and Russia because he wants to build Trump Tower to make money in Russia? These are things we need to know, and he needs to be held accountable for. And it's the same thing was true back during Watergate. You don't want someone who doesn't respect our justice system.
People have got to know whether or not their president is a crook. Well, I'm not a crook.
At the time, Richard Nixon famously proclaimed his innocence, but secretly taped conversations in the Oval Office showed Nixon's guilt, like asking his White House counsel John Dean about payoffs to keep the Watergate burglars quiet.
I tell him, it's likely all these people are going to ask for money, and we don't have that kind of money. And Nixon says to me, well, how much could it cost? And I pull out of thin air what I think is a number that will offend him. And I just pure guessing. I said, well, Mr. President, it could cost $1 million. That's what, about $5.5 million in today's dollars. And his response is, well, John, that's no problem. I know where we can get $1 million.
Donald Trump's payoffs were to a porn star, not burglars. And according to John Dean, there's another difference between Trump and Nixon. He says Richard Nixon understood the presidency.
Trump is the most incompetent man we've ever had try to become president. He is not somebody who has really any understanding of Washington or the presidency. And he seems to have wanted the job as a form of advertisement for his business.
But incompetence is just one issue for the Trump presidency. Alleged high crimes and misdemeanors are another. A U.S. president can be impeached, removed from office by a congressional vote, but there's an unresolved question. Can a sitting president be indicted for a crime, tried, even convicted?
Impeachment is certainly a possibility, impeachment and removal from office, which won't answer the question about criminal liability, because there's no question that after he's not the sitting president, he can be indicted.
But Watergate didn't solve that, because Richard Nixon evaded both impeachment and indictment when he became the first American president to quit. After the break,
I know more about ISIS than the generals do, believe me.
Is Donald Trump fit to be president?
There's no way you can avoid the fact that this is a person who would not classify as being mentally healthy.
A year after the inauguration, 2018, White House physician Dr. Ronnie Jackson announced the results of the presidential medical.
Good afternoon, everyone. President Donald J. Trump has completed his first periodic physical examination as President of the United States.
He said Donald Trump was not only in excellent physical health, but cognitive health as well.
A cognitive screening exam using the Montreal Cognitive Assessment was normal with a score of 30/30.
That was based on this. The cognitive assessment Donald Trump took, a single page with questions like, name these 3 animals, read a list of 29 letters, read a list of 5 numbers, and what date is it, and where are you?
The fact that the president got, 30 out of 30 on that exam, I think that, there's no indication whatsoever that he has any cognitive issues.
Is it a test that in any way indicates somebody's preparedness and capability to be the president of the U.S.?
No, it would be extremely concerning if you didn't get a 30 out of 30.
Dr. James Hamblin is a physician who writes for The Atlantic. He wants a different kind of test, an objective medical evaluation, so Americans can know exactly what they're getting when they choose a president.
There should be some standardized, transparent process by which candidates are evaluated in a way that the American people know if there are issues that could compromise a person's ability to execute the duties of the office. Not suggesting that should supplant a democratic election, but the people should know going in.
I love you. I love you, folks.
And there's a lot to know about Trump, his impulsivity and anger issues.
I'd blow up every single inch. There would be nothing left.
Like threatening North Korea with nuclear war.
They will be met with fire and fury like the world has never seen.
His grandiosity.
I'm very highly educated. I know words. I have the best words. I'm very rich. I'm really rich.
His pomposity.
Nobody knows much more about technology, this type of technology, certainly, than I do. I know more about ISIS than the generals do, believe me.
Dr. Hamblin has never examined Donald Trump, but he says even from afar, there are clues about possible changes in his cognitive status.
There's a narrowing of his vocabulary. He says things are the best or the worst, or the best he's ever seen, the greatest. The number of adjectives that he uses, the way he describes things, it's changed over the years. And we have a really unique situation with Donald Trump in that you have audio and video of him decade after decade, which you can go back and compare.
And for those who've observed Trump over time, his patterns of behavior seem troubling.
As someone who watched Trump a lot and saw him both as a candidate and as a president, there's no way you can avoid the fact that this is a person who you would not classify as being mentally healthy. I think Trump is a person who has serious personality disorders, whose motivations are incredibly suspect, who probably doesn't have a high degree of personal morality. If he was a member of your family, you would have concerns.
Let alone if he were the American president.
I will faithfully execute the office of President.
The fundamental concern: has Donald Trump fulfilled the presidential oath he took to uphold the U.S. Constitution?
So help me God.
Congratulations, Mr. President. It's just 35 words long, and his critics believe he began to violate it almost as soon as he finished speaking. Representative Jamie Raskin, a Democrat from Maryland, is a former constitutional law professor who sits on the Judiciary and Oversight Committees, two of the bodies taking dead aim at the president.
Presidential indictment, the indictment of a sitting president. You're a legalist. Is that possible?
Look, there's nothing in the Constitution which says that the president may not be indicted. The question of whether or not the president may actually be prosecuted while in office or jailed, that is a different question.
The president himself seems to think he would get a pass, even for murder.
I could stand in the middle of Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody and I wouldn't lose any voters, okay? It's like incredible.
It's hard for me to believe that if the president shot somebody on Fifth Avenue, to take Donald Trump's example, that he couldn't be indicted for that. I mean, maybe there's an argument that he should not have to be prosecuted until after he leaves office. Yeah. But would anybody really believe that that would not be within the power of the government to render an indictment? Yeah. It's hard for me to believe that.
This message brought to you by our good friends at America First.
Not surprisingly, the Godzilla of Trump truth, radio host John Fredericks, doesn't buy that.
Can a sitting president, i.e. Donald Trump, be indicted,
no,
tried, convicted?
No, absolutely not.
Why not?
Because we have a process for that. It's called impeachment.
I will fight every day until he is impeached.
And impeachment seems to be a recurring theme in U.S. politics for both parties. If you can't beat them, impeach them.
We're gonna go in there, we're gonna impeach the mother.
Individual House members have already filed notices of impeachment. But practically, Democratic leadership knows that for now, rushing into impeachment could backfire.
Impeachment is a very divisive approach to take, and we shouldn't take it for anything other than the facts.
It may be the only thing Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Donald Trump's base agree on.
If he is impeached in the House, which is 50-50, he'll get exonerated in the Senate pretty quickly, and people are going to react to that.
In the opinion of John Dean, Richard Nixon's White House counsel, the best course for Trump could be for him to be the second U.S. president to quit.
What would I do if I was White House counsel? I would tell this man that he should resign. And he should resign for his own good, the good of his family, but most importantly, the good of the country.
Donald Trump may seem an unlikely candidate to sacrifice himself for the greater good, but there is another constitutional remedy. It's the 25th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which provides a process should the sitting president become incapacitated. In other words, unfit, physically or mentally. But here's where it gets tricky. The 25th Amendment allows a small group of people in the administration, including the vice president and at least 8 cabinet members, to decide if the president is unable to perform the duties of his office. If so, his powers pass temporarily to the vice president. Some in Washington see that as a pipe dream. Others, a real possibility.
Where, if anywhere, in your frame of mind were the notions of impeachment, of the indictment of a sitting president, or of the 25th Amendment to the Constitution?
I can't say that the thoughts didn't cross my mind. This is a president who was inaugurated engaging in a series of actions that arguably constituted high crimes and misdemeanors. The president's been collecting payments from foreign princes, kings, and governments. All of those things were on my mind. The 25th Amendment is one that I began to focus on early as I really began to study the patterns of behavior.
one more thought about this. There's a theory making the rounds in Washington that may sound like the ultimate conspiracy. It goes, what if Donald Trump, with the help of Vice President Mike Pence, were to invoke the 25th Amendment against himself?
There's also been rumors that maybe the president would resign under the 25th Amendment for 15 minutes, get pardoned by the vice president, and then resume his office. Anything's possible.
So is that 25th Amendment scenario far-fetched? Undoubtedly. Could it happen? After all we've seen in the past 2 years under President Donald J. Trump, why not? And a word of caution, Matt Taibbi believes this may well not be the end for Trump if the Democrats continue to be obsessed with him and not with changing themselves.
They're focused on stuff like the 25th Amendment, Russiagate, and the impeachment. And that's what I really worry about, is that they're going to go all the way to 2020, having not thought about this again, and they're going to reelect the guy.